Pacific Drive is a roguelike, which is a genre I loathe, and if I'd known it was a roguelike before I bought it, I most likely wouldn't have. But with my money spent and the weekend open, I decided to try out Pacific Drive, and to my shock and delight, there's an option in the menus that lets you keep all your stuff when you die. For that alone, Pacific Drive gets points from me, and with my biggest existential fear of wasting my time out of the way, I got to appreciate how Pacific Drive works as a survival game. Pacific Drive is a game built around a core gameplay loop that all roguelikes follow, a procedurally generated world, but it interestingly doesn't have combat. Instead, the game tests you like a survival game should, with the environment itself being the enemy. I adore this philosophy. Not enough games are creative enough to make a game that feels intense without enemies to combat, but the Olympic exclusion zone is as mysterious a mistress as she is dangerous. It actually made me feel a lot better knowing that nothing out here was trying to get me, and that my deaths were my own fault and not because of some cheap enemy. But speaking of that environment, I don't think that the procedural generation is doing it any favours. See, Pacific Drive felt like it was missing a hook for me, something to motivate me to get back out there beyond scavenging for resources. I was looking for a reason to explore. Procedural generation has officially become something I don't like anymore in open world games, because they rob the player of any fun sense of discovery they might have in a handcrafted world. If Bethesda couldn't get it right, then I'm damn sure that no indie studio can. Just to be explicitly clear, I'm all for it in proper combat-focused roguelikes. Still, in games like Pacific Drive and Starfield, which sell themselves on exploration, then procedural generation is a disappointment to me. But just because you don't make intriguing discoveries in Pacific Drive doesn't mean the world is empty by any means. While the facilities you discover are pretty much the same, the game balances this with an imposed time limit on how long you can spend in each area before the storm wipes you away. This brings me to the absolute highlight of playing the game, the escape sequences. This is where the procedural generation really shines, as no two escape runs are ever the same. I have had escape runs that felt every bit as exhilarating as the final mission of Halo 3, with the storm closing in on all sides as I rushed towards the Beacon of Hope. One time my car ran out of gas 15 meters away from the beacon and I got fried, although I understand how these moments are random for every player, and the majority of my escapes weren't thrill-inducing, so maybe I just got lucky a couple of times. What Pacific Drive does better than most survival games I've seen is that it doesn't force you to stop the plot to craft an essential item. Well, it does, but only once. But I remember when I played Grounded, having to constantly grind for a single-use item because Obsidian didn't make the main story long enough. By the way, that game is still totally worth it to PS5 and Switch players. Pacific Drive uses the much better method of absolutely kicking your ass if you neglect its upgrade tree. Since the majority of parts can be found in lower level areas, the game becomes a zen meditation that I actually really love. These are my guilty pleasures, since I'm not actually achieving anything in a game when I do this, but grinding some dungeons in Diablo or Korok hunting in Zelda is something that just really mellows me out. Pacific Drive fills that unique niche for me quite well, and when I do get those upgrades, it feels so gratifying. Still, at the same time, it always feels like it's not enough, because by the time I get my car upgraded, some crazy new anomaly I've never seen before will wreck my ride in an instant, and that makes this world feel oddly electric and scary. It feels weird to say about a game with this kind of structure, but the pacing is incredible. Each time you feel like you've adapted to the ever-changing zone, a new anomaly or environmental threat will appear, throwing your entire build into chaos. The chaotic evolution of Pacific Drive is what makes the core loop of scavenging and upgrading so engaging. How your progress feels so incremental, but never insignificant, as the challenges you overcome are quickly replaced by newer, more abstract threats, and the setting of an erratic world that threatens you not out of malice, but sheer unsustainability, means each failure feels like your own inability to adapt, rather than overwhelming threats. While I don't like to talk about difficulty, because every single player goes into every game with a different level of skill, I will admit that I couldn't even begin to stomach this game without messing around with a few of the accessibility options. If there's one thing missing from Pacific Drive, it's the ability to skip over lower level areas while you cruise towards your goal deeper into the zone. As long as you're not stopping to scavenge, there's nothing here that could realistically threaten you as you make your way to your destination. While they do add a sense of relaxation to your journey, the procedural generation can make these routes feel a bit elongated, and I would have preferred an option that let me skip these early game zones, but cost me more fuel than it would have to drive across them in real time. Pacific Drive is a dreadful and chaotic survival game that requires sufficient planning and grinding to complete. It's able to hit both ends of the spectrum of a relaxing road trip through an irradiated apocalypse, and an intense drive-for-your-life survival game with split-second decision-making that could cost you your entire run. This makes it a unique game, made to appeal to a specific demographic, and I love it when games are able to hyper-focus towards one type of player, even if that's not me.